Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the great invisible architects of the modern world.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, this is a company that touches literally everything you eat, probably the fuel in your car, and its massive influence is often, completely silent
Right. Until it isn't.
until it explodes into a headline. We are talking about Archer Daniels Midland, or as most people know it, ADM.
And if you are trying to understand the architecture of the global food supply chain, you just have to understand ADM. They are not just a player.
No.
They're the bedrock. Billions of meals, gallons of fuel, all built on the infrastructure they created. Our mission today is to go way beyond the corporate description and really define what this agribusiness giant does.
Okay, so let's unpack this for you, the listener. This is a Fortune 500 company. We're talking number 35 in 2023.
And the revenue numbers are just staggering.
For 2024, it's clocking in at, what, $85.5 billion?
Yeah, $85.5 billion. And when we talk about scale, it's not just money, it's physical presence. 270 processing plants.
And over 400 crop procurement facilities all over the globe.
Scattered everywhere. That isn't just a business. That is global infrastructure.
It really is.
Exactly. And their core identity, it's this multinational corporation focused on food processing and commodities trading. They take the essential building blocks.
The raw stuff.
Cereal grains, oilseeds, yeah. And they convert them into, thousands of different products for food, beverages, nutraceuticals, animal feed, industrial markets. They're the bridge.
A bridge between the field and the factory.
That's it.
So our objective today is to move beyond these gigantic numbers. We want to understand the history, the decisions that turned a tiny linseed crushing business into a world power.
And the product portfolio. It's so much more than people think.
We have to talk about that. From the high fructose corn syrup in your soda to the ethanol in your gas tank. And we absolutely have to confront the long, dark shadow cast by their repeated high-profile scandals.
Which is the real story here, in a way.
I mean, one of these scandals was so audacious, so completely wild, it inspired a novel and then a major Hollywood film, The Informant.
And that juxtaposition, that's the central narrative of ADM. They are, on one hand, completely indispensable to the smooth functioning of global food trade. They act as a stabilizing force.
Right, especially during crises.
But on the other hand, they are just consistently entangled in these really serious ethical and legal controversies.
And it's not new.
Oh, not at all. It stretches back over a century. They started in 1902 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, eventually moved their headquarters to Chicago in 2014. And their whole history reveals this constant tension between being an indispensable necessity and, alleged misconduct.
To really grasp the modern behemoth that ADM is today, we have to start at the seed. Literally. Let's trace that path from crushing linseed oil to, global dominance. The foundation was laid in the early 20th century.
It all begins with one man, John W. Daniels, and his linseed crushing business in Minneapolis back in 1902.
Okay, so for context, what was linseed oil even for? It's not something you see on the grocery shelf.
No, not for eating. It was a critical industrial input. It comes from flaxseed and is used extensively in paints, varnishes, and especially linoleum flooring.
Yeah, linoleum.
So it was essential for the industrial expansion happening all across the U.S. at the time, a foundational product.
And the partnership that actually formed the company name, that came pretty quickly after.
Very quickly. George A. Archer joins the operation in 1903, and by 1905, they officially become the Archer Daniels Linseed Company. They were focused, but you could already see they were thinking about diversification.
And the move that really cemented their footprint in the industry came in 1923.
Yes, the acquisition of Midland Linseed Products Company. This is the moment the name solidifies into the one we know today, the Archer Daniels Midland Company.
But this wasn't just a name change, right? This was a massive step toward market dominance.
A huge step. How big? Post-acquisition, the new ADM commanded assets over $11 million.
Which was enormous money back then.
Enormous. And more importantly, they controlled about 35% of the entire linseed mill capacity in the United States.
35%, just like that.
Overnight. They went from being a large regional player to a true national tower in industrial oil.
And from there, the expansion just accelerated.
It did. They listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 1924, which gave them the capital they needed for even more growth. And by 1927, they'd established their dedicated grain division.
So they recognized they needed to control the sourcing of the raw materials, not just the crushing part.
Exactly. Vertical integration right from the start. And diversification wasn't limited to just oil. In 1930, they made another huge move.
This was the flour milling.
The flour milling. They bought control of the Commander Larrabee Corporation, which instantly made them a major force there.
Yeah.
They had the capacity to produce 32,000 barrels of flour every single day.
Incredible. But the real game changer, the technical innovation that really dictated ADM's entire trajectory for the rest of the 20th century, that came a few years later.
In 1934. And you're absolutely right.
You're talking about the shift away from linseed and toward the new king of agriculture, the soybean.
Precisely. In Chicago, they started operating the first continuous solvent extraction plant. Before this, oil extraction was a messy mechanical process.
Just squeezing it out with presses.
High-pressure mechanical presses, yeah. It was a slower batch-based process, and it left a lot of valuable oil behind in the meal. It was just inefficient.
So explain this new process for us. How did continuous solvent extraction change the game?
Well, think of it like this. Instead of just squeezing the oil out with physical pressure, they introduced a chemical solvent, usually hexene. And this solvent completely dissolves the oil out of the crushed seed. The process runs nonstop, continuously, and it is just far, far more efficient. It pulls out much more oil, and it leaves behind a cleaner, higher protein meal.
Which is valuable in itself for animal feed.
Hugely valuable. It created two valuable product streams from one input.
That sounds like a complete industrial revolution for agriculture.
It really was. The source material calls this a turning point, because it made the large-scale production of soybean oil, which was quickly becoming this popular, cheap, edible oil, incredibly cost-effective.
So this technology basically created the modern soybean industry.
It fueled it. This technological mastery fundamentally altered the American agricultural landscape and drove the rapid expansion of soybean farming across the entire Midwest.
And building on this foundation of soy processing, they kept innovating. By 1965, they registered the original patent for textured vegetable protein, TVP.
TVP, yeah. They started producing it in 1966. And this shows they were already looking for these high-value applications for their processed materials, long before plant-based protein became the huge trend it is today.
They were decades ahead of the curve.
Decades. So the stage was set for the biggest transformation yet. In 1969, they moved their headquarters from Minneapolis to Decatur, Illinois.
Placing them right in the heart of the soybean and corn country they now dominated.
Exactly. And then came the Duane Andreas era.
Which, as you noted earlier, is arguably the most important and definitely the most controversial period in the company's history. This runs from 1970 to 1997.
Andreas is the one who took a massive national processor and turned it into a true global empire.
So what was his strategy?
He took over as CEO in 1970, and his strategy was just audacious. It was aggressive domestic acquisition coupled with incredibly rapid international expansion. He was also a master at capitalizing on geopolitical shifts.
Like the Soviet Union needing American grain.
Exactly. He used that to push ADM's reach far beyond the borders of the U.S. He was a master of politics and business.
And the raw data from that period is just incredible. I mean, under Andreas, the company's soybean exports, they didn't just double or triple.
No, they soared. From $1.5 billion to $7 billion. That's not just managing supply chains, that is dominating international trade.
And this expansion was all about control, wasn't it?
Absolutely. In 1974, they established their first international processing footprints. They bought soybean plants in Holland and in Brazil. They weren't just exporting U.S. grain anymore.
They were building global hubs.
Right, to service local markets, to minimize logistics costs, to be everywhere at once.
And the final piece of the puzzle to make them a true multinational commodity trader. That came in 1982.
That's when they bought a portion of the German firm, Topfer International. That acquisition was key, because it gave ADM this deep, specialized expertise in moving raw commodities globally.
So they could connect farmers in the Americas to consumers and processors in Europe, Asia, everywhere.
They became the central nervous system for agricultural trade.
It's also really crucial to note the timing of Andreas's departure. He stepped down in 1997. He was succeeded by his nephew, G. Allen Andreas.
And that transition happened just 1 year after the company pleaded guilty to the massive price-fixing scandal that defined that era.
A shadow we are definitely going to discuss in detail later, but it marked the end of his, quarter-century reign?
A very tumultuous end.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at the modern strategy, from 2001 to the present, you see this very conscious effort to pivot.
A pivot away from just bulk commodities.
Right, toward higher margin, specialized products. You see this especially under later CEOs like Patricia Wirtz and the current CEO, Juan Luciano.
Luciano, who took over in 2014, he really drove a major restructuring aimed at increasing profitability and reducing that commodity market volatility.
And that meant aggressive acquisitions in specialized ingredients.
Nothing demonstrates this pivot better than the 2014 deal, the acquisition of Wild Flavors.
The Swiss-German natural ingredient company. For $3 billion.
Yeah.
And you mentioned ADM is the invisible architect of our food system.
Wild Flavors is the architect of the invisible taste in that food.
And texture and color. Exactly.
So why was that deal so pivotal? Why spend $3 billion on a flavor company?
Because the margins on bulk corn and soybean oil are razor thin. They are highly volatile. They depend on weather, on global markets, on politics.
Unpredictable.
Very. The future profitability was in specialized, high-motion ingredients. Consumers were demanding healthier, cleaner labels, natural flavors, functional ingredients. The Wild Flavors deal instantly gave ADM access to that profitable, health-oriented food sector.
So it reduced the reliance on that traditional commodity grind.
Dramatically. And they just continued down that path. In 2018, they acquired the vanilla supplier Rodell.
And then came that big flurry of deals in 2021 that really drove home the new focus.
Right, the focus on nutrition and specialized feed. Those acquisitions were so targeted, a 75% stake in 4 pet food companies for $450 million.
And they bought a Serbian soy business, Sojaprotein.
And, crucially, Deerland probiotics and enzymes. This is ADM moving from simply crushing beans to producing these very specific, customized ingredients. Probiotics, prebiotics, enzymes for both human and animal health.
And they formalized this shift internally around 2018, 2019, right, when they restructured into those new units.
Yes, units focused on carbohydrate solutions, nutrition, oilseeds, and origination. They're actively trying to manage the perception that they are just a grain company.
Because there's so much more now.
So much more. And finally, it's important to recognize the sobering reality of their global picture. The source material noted that ADM saw profits rise in 2022.
During the global food crisis caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yes. While many were scrambling, ADM's logistical mastery and their ability to, well, arbitrage commodity movements allowed them to profit. It just underscores their critical and very profitable role in stabilizing essential commodity flows during times of intense global instability.
Okay, so we've tracked the growth and the strategy. Now let's really look under the hood at the engine itself. How exactly does ADM deploy all this infrastructure to generate that $85.5 billion in revenue? Let's drill down into the core business segments.
And these segments really do reveal the industrial mechanism of ADM. They are so vertically integrated, they control the process from the moment a crop is originated or bought from a farmer until the final ingredient is sold to a food manufacturer.
Let's start with the foundation, their traditional core, oilseeds processing.
This is the historical heart of the business. It encompasses the global origination, merchandising, crushing, and the further processing of a whole range of oilseeds.
Soybeans, obviously, but also cottonseed, sunflower seeds, canola.
Flaxseed, palm kernel, DDAG oil. The output creates this crucial duality in global markets. You get vegetable oils for food, cooking, and industrial use, and you get protein meals for animal feed.
And this segment isn't just a historical relic, it is still ADM's biggest revenue generator.
Absolutely. It proves the enduring power of large-scale commodity processing.
I was struck by the resilience data. I mean, even in the first quarter of 2020, right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the operating profit for this segment rose by $422 million.
A 1.2% increase. It's remarkable stability, especially during a time of global market panic.
So why is it so stable?
That stability comes from being essential. I mean, no matter the economic climate, people and animals need to eat. And processed oils and proteins are absolutely fundamental to modern food production.
Okay, so next up we have the highly political and I'm sure highly profitable corn processing segment.
This is the segment that really dictates the ingredients we find in a huge range of processed foods. This is the sweet side of ADM.
The sweet side, like
Yeah,
that.
this involves corn wet milling and dry milling, and it's highly concentrated in the American Midwest. The outputs are enormous. Sweeteners like corn syrup, glucose, dextrose, and of course the most famous one,
High fructose corn syrup.
HFCS. Their position here is so strong they were ranked second on the top 50 global sweetener companies list in 2021.
But the importance of this segment isn't just about food, right? It's deeply tied to government policy and fuel. This is the bioenergy connection.
Absolutely. The profitability of corn processing is massively, and I mean massively, underpinned by the U.S. Renewable Fuel Standard and ethanol mandates.
So government policy is creating a guaranteed market for their product.
A huge, guaranteed market. The source material noted that ADM nearly doubled its capital spending back in 2007 to over $1 billion, specifically targeting bioenergy projects. They are the largest ethanol producer in the U.S.
So their corn processing division is profiting immensely, not just from market demand for sweeteners, but from a federally mandated requirement to blend bioethanol into the nation's gasoline supply.
It's a powerful symbiotic relationship between corporate scale and government policy. It creates a captive market for a huge portion of the corn harvest.
And they've looked beyond corn, too.
They have. They're always looking for the next feedstock. Back in 2008, they explored using jatropha, which is a non-food crop, for biofuel in a partnership with Daimler and Bayer Crop Science. Their core competency is processing, so they can switch feedstock based on subsidies, market trends, or political mandates.
Okay, moving on. We come to agricultural services. You called this the invisible behemoth that glues the whole operation together.
They did, because it's arguably the most impressive part of their whole operation. This is their massive logistics and distribution engine.
This is the physical infrastructure.
All of it. Their U.S. grain elevator network for storage, their global transportation network, which includes their own subsidiary, American River Transportation Company.
They operate massive barge fleets on the rivers.
Exactly. And ADM trucking, and their port operations worldwide. If we look at the logistics of moving agricultural goods, ADM isn't just moving the grain.
They are the path the grain takes.
They are the essential middleman. They buy, they store, they count, and they transport corn, wheat, oats, rice, barley, and oilseeds. They handle the incredibly complex coordination required to get a crop from a remote farm, store it securely, clean it to standards, move it by truck and river barge, and then load it onto an ocean-going vessel that's bound for another continent.
And their role is to resell these commodities, either as ingredients to food manufacturers or as raw materials for their own processing plants.
Without this massive logistical engine, the global supply chain it grinds to a halt.
Finally, we should touch on investor services. This isn't generating the physical revenue of the other segments, but it reveals their financial sophistication.
ADM Investor Services, Inc. It operates as a registered futures commission merchant and a clearing member of all the principal commodities exchanges in the U.S.
Why is that critical?
Well, when you are buying and selling commodities at the scale ADM does, you are exposed to massive financial risk from prices that fluctuate every second.
So they need a way to hedge that risk.
An extensive, integrated financial brokerage arm to hedge against risk, manage trades, and conduct brokerage services globally. It is the necessary financial appendage to their physical trading operations. They have to play in that market to protect themselves.
We've established that ADM is this essential, massive engine for global food and fuel. But when you operate at that kind of scale, the environmental consequences of your operations are equally immense.
They have to be.
And this is where we shift gears a bit and look at the company's environmental ledger, which is, frankly, pretty troubling.
The environmental history of ADM is marked by some significant systemic issues that often required intervention by federal regulatory bodies like the EPA.
Let's start with those fines back in the early 2000s. In 2001, ADM paid a $1.46 million fine. This was for violating federal and Illinois clean air regulations at its Decatur feed plant.
And more importantly, they were required to spend another $1.6 million specifically on equipment upgrades to reduce the air pollution there.
So it wasn't just a fine, it was a mandate to fix the problem.
Yes, but that was just the start. The larger issue surfaced in 2003, and this involved systemic violations across their facilities nationwide.
This was about the Clean Air Act.
It was. ADM settled federal air pollution complaints related to avoiding the new source review provisions of the Clean Air Act.
And for those who are unfamiliar, the new source review provisions are vital. They require facilities to install modern, effective pollution control technologies whenever they do a major modernization project.
And ADM was alleged to have modernized plants without implementing those required environmental upgrades, basically trying to get around the rules.
And the scale of the settlement that resulted from this was just staggering.
It was. They paid $4.5 million in penalties. But the bigger cost was they agreed to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to eliminate more than 60,000 tons of pollutants.
Pollutants like what?
carbon monoxide, particulate matter, volatile organic compounds from 42 plants across 17 states.
42 plants. So that tells you the failure to comply wasn't an isolated incident. It was widespread across their entire operational footprint.
Exactly. Now, turning to climate change, ADM reported total CO2 equivalent emissions for 2022 at over 15,000 kilotons.
That is an enormous carbon footprint.
A huge footprint that they are now working to reduce. They have set clear targets, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 25% and energy intensity by 15% by 2035.
And achieving those reductions relies heavily on high-tech solutions.
It does, which brings us to their ambitious but very troubled foray into industrial carbon capture and storage, CCS.
This is where ADM became a key partner with the U.S. government, using massive federal funds to essentially experiment with climate mitigation technology at scale.
The funding came largely through the 2009 American Recovery and Reinvestment Act via the Department of Energy's ICCS program. The goal is pretty simple. Prove that large-scale industrial CO2 emissions could be captured and safely stored deep underground.
They ran two major projects in Illinois. The first one, the Illinois Basin Decatur Project, or IBDP, began in 2011.
Right. They captured carbon from an ADM biofuel facility and injected it into the Mount Simon sandstone, a deep saline reservoir.
And the government put a lot of money into this.
The DOE contributed $66.7 million just for that initial feasibility study. And at first, the results looked positive. Over 3 years, the injection site proved highly effective. The geology was accepting the CO2 even more easily than they expected.
So based on that success, they launched a much larger project, the ILCCS, in 2017. The goal this time was to inject 1 million tons of carbon underground.
And to do it in just 1 year compared to 3 years for the first project.
So a much faster injection rate.
And the public investment grew significantly. $141 million from the Department of Energy, matched by over $66 million in private funding. This was meant to be the commercial blueprint for future industrial capture sites across the country.
But this is where the deep dive reveals the critical contradiction. In November 2020, a report from Investigate Midwest found that the project had only stored about half of that 1 million ton target.
And that's not even the biggest contradiction. The whole goal was climate reduction, right?
Of course.
Yet carbon emissions from the Decatur facility where the capture was actually taking place increased during the project period. They went from 4.2 million tons in 2016 to 4.4 million tons in 2019.
Wait, hold on. They spent hundreds of millions of public and private dollars to sequester carbon, yet the facility's overall carbon output went up.
That's right.
That sounds like the definition of a failed climate initiative, regardless of whether the technology worked in a vacuum.
The Department of Energy defended it.
Yeah.
They said the demonstration that the storage technology works was successful and that this knowledge could be applied elsewhere. But you were right. From a net climate impact perspective, the core mission was fundamentally missed.
It's like the massive scale of their operations just overwhelmed the attempt at mitigation.
It seems so. And the regulatory problems continued right up to the present. In September 2023, the EPA issued a proposed enforcement order.
What for?
A notice of violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. A leak was detected. Roughly 8,000 metric tons of liquid carbon dioxide and other fluids had leaked, leading ADM to suspend all injections.
Wow, so another setback.
A big one. It just highlights the inherent technical volatility and regulatory sensitivity that comes with deep well carbon storage, even for a company with massive government backing.
Now, to provide the necessary balance here, we should note the massive push into regenerative agriculture that ADM is undertaking.
Right. Applying their logistical scale towards sustainable sourcing. They've committed significant resources here. They established a partnership with PepsiCo in 2022 to scale up regenerative agriculture practices.
Things like reducing tillage and increasing cover crops.
Exactly. Across their North American supply chains. As of December 2023, ADM had allocated almost 2 million acres of land within its supply chain for this program.
And they provide financial incentives and technical support to the farmers.
They do. It's a massive scale, and it proves they can be a force for good when they apply that infrastructure. It's a necessary counterbalance to the industrial pollution and carbon issues we just discussed.
Now we arrive at the segment that, for many people, provides the ultimate context for ADM's culture. Its long, persistent history of ethical and legal troubles. This is the company that has been in the regulatory crosshairs for over a century.
And that historical perspective is so crucial. We are not looking at isolated modern incidents here. We're looking at a century-long pattern of anti-competitive behavior. And it starts right near the beginning with the Sherman antitrust violation in 1920.
The U.S. Department of Justice sued the National Linseed Oil Trust and its co-defendants, which included the Archer Daniels Manufacturing Company.
And the charge was straightforward collusion, price fixing, to raise linseed oil prices.
And the price jump was dramatic.
It spiked from 50 cents a gallon to $1.80 a gallon between 1916 and 1918. That early case just demonstrated the company's comfort level with price manipulation and market control. It's a very worrying precedent for the decades to come.
But the scandal that truly defines ADM for the public, the one that inspired the book and the movie The Informant, is the lysine price-fixing conspiracy of the 1990s.
Oh yeah, this is the ultimate example of corporate arrogance just colliding head-on with a federal investigation.
So what was lysine?
It's an essential amino acid. It's used primarily to enhance protein in animal feed, so it's a huge global market. And the U.S. Justice Department launched a price-fixing investigation into that market.
And the investigation was driven entirely by an insider.
Mark Whitaker, a senior ADM executive
Yeah.
who secretly became an FBI whistleblower.
The story is just incredible. Whitaker spent years covertly recording conversations, exposing this international cartel that ADM had formed with its primary competitors to fix prices globally.
And the material that came from those tapes reveals this shocking corporate philosophy. I mean, in one of the tapes that was played during the trial, an ADM official articulated the internal culture perfectly. He said, "Our competitors are our friends. Our customers are the enemy."
Our customers are the enemy. That one quote just became a symbol of corporate greed and anti-consumer behavior in the 1990s.
It's an astounding thing to say, let alone believe. That level of brazen hostility toward your own customer base.
So what were the tangible consequences for this profound breach of public trust?
They were severe and groundbreaking at the time. In 1997, ADM was fined $100 million.
Which was the largest antitrust fine in U.S. history at the time.
The largest ever. And furthermore, 3 top officials, including Vice Chairman Dwayne Andreas' nephew, were sentenced to federal prison in 1999.
So this wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was criminal prosecution of top management.
People went to jail. And what adds that layer of, I don't know, Hollywood absurdity to the whole story is the fact that Mark Whitaker, the FBI whistleblower,
He wasn't clean either.
not at all. He was simultaneously embezzling millions of dollars from ADM while he was wearing a wire for the FBI.
Yeah.
The level of internal corporate chaos is just almost unbelievable.
It's a movie for a reason.
It is. And the fallout continued for ADM for years. In 2005, they settled a massive class action antitrust suit related to the lysine and citric acid price fixing. They had to pay another $400 million.
The financial and reputational damage was immense.
But the company survived because it was, and is, indispensable to the global food chain.
And beyond domestic antitrust issues, ADM has repeatedly faced international financial misconduct charges, which reveal the compliance risks of operating globally.
Let's look at the alleged tax dodging case in Argentina in 2011.
What happened there?
Argentina's Revenue Service launched an investigation into ADM and other big grain traders, Bunge, Cargill, LDC, because global commodity prices were spiking hugely, but these companies were reporting minimal taxable profit in Argentina.
The numbers didn't add up.
Not at all. The allegation centered on a concept that's critical to understand here: transfer mispricing.
Okay, explain that for us. What is transfer mispricing?
It involves manipulating the price of internal transactions between a company's own subsidiaries located in different countries. For example, the ADM subsidiary in Argentina might sell grain to an ADM subsidiary in a low-tax country, like a tax haven.
At an artificially low price?
Exactly. So the profit is artificially shifted out of high-tax Argentina, where the value was actually created, and it's parked in the low-tax jurisdiction.
I see.
They were accused of submitting false sales declarations and inflating costs locally using phantom firms just to reduce their recorded profits.
Yeah.
The outstanding taxes were estimated to be nearly $1 billion.
$1 billion.
Now, the companies denied the claims, but it highlights the aggressive tax strategies that are often employed by these multinational commodity traders.
And then there's the undeniable violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, which the SEC announced in 2013. This is straight-up bribery.
Yes. ADM was charged for failing to prevent illicit payments bribes made by their foreign subsidiaries to Ukrainian government officials to secure business. They were operating in a high-risk environment, and their compliance systems completely failed.
And what was the resolution?
It was complex. A subsidiary in Ukraine pleaded guilty to conspiracy. ADM itself entered what's called a non-prosecution agreement regarding improper payments in Ukraine and separate improper payments by an ADM joint venture in Venezuela.
So what was the final bill for all of that?
To settle the SEC's charges, ADM paid over $36 million, bringing the total paid to settle all the FCPA-related charges to over $54 million.
It's just another case that demonstrates this gap between the corporation's necessary role in global trade and the ethical compromises that are sometimes made to operate within those markets.
A very expensive gap.
Okay, finally, let's bring the scrutiny right up to the present day with two major issues, one involving politics and one involving their own internal accounting. First, the highly questionable Sonny Perdue land sale.
This was a massive ethical red flag. The Washington Post reported that in 2017, ADM sold a piece of land to a company owned by Sonny Perdue,
Who was, at the time, the incoming Secretary of Agriculture under President Trump.
The timing is key, and the sale price was the source of all the controversy. The land was reportedly sold at a massive discount
$250,000.
for land that ethics lawyers and real estate analysts estimated was worth millions.
That does not look good.
No. Ethics lawyers immediately questioned the legality and the ethics of the transaction. They suggested the massive discount could be interpreted as a gift or potentially a bribe.
Because ADM is one of the most heavily regulated companies by the USDA.
And the concern was that ADM stood to benefit from ensuring they had a friendly Secretary of Agriculture in place. It's a perfect illustration of how corporate interests and political access can intertwine in the agribusiness sector.
And that brings us to the most immediate controversy, which is shaking the company today. The internal accounting probe disclosed in January 2024.
This ties back directly to that strategic pivot we talked about earlier, the focus on the high-growth nutrition segment.
Right.
In 2020, ADM tied senior executive bonuses to the success of this segment, even though it accounts for less than 10% of the company's total revenue.
And those incentives are certainly effective, at least for the executives. In January 2023, the top 7 executives collectively received shares worth about $72 million for exceeding performance metrics in that nutrition segment.
But that success very quickly came under scrutiny. In January 2024, ADM disclosed that the SEC had requested information regarding accounting practices within that nutrition business. Specifically, they were looking at intersegment transactions.
Let's clearly define that concept for the listener. What are intersegment transactions and why would the SEC care about them?
So, intersegment transactions are internal transfers of goods or services between different operating units within the same company. For example, the massive oilseed segment selling ingredients to the smaller nutrition segment.
Okay, an internal sale.
Right. And if ADM artificially manipulated the price of those internal sales, say selling goods cheaply to the nutrition segment, it could artificially inflate the nutrition segment's reported profit margins.
And if executive bonuses were tied to that specific segment's performance?
Then internal accounting could have been used to trigger multi-million-dollar payouts for executives.
What a huge problem.
A huge potential problem. And the outcome was swift and severe. ADM immediately suspended its chief financial officer and postponed its required quarterly earnings and annual filings.
But the situation escalated dramatically in March of 2024.
It did. That's when we saw sources report that FBI agents delivered grand jury subpoenas to current and former employees.
Subpoenas authorized by the U.S. Attorney's Manhattan office.
Which confirms that the regulatory inquiry has now formally escalated into a criminal investigation. ADM's pattern of high-stakes financial and ethical breaches is continuing in real time as we speak.
So when we synthesize everything we've covered today, the story of Archer Daniels Midland is truly defined by these two competing realities.
It really is. On one hand, you have the indispensable foundational global agricultural processor, the company that masters the complex logistics of moving oil seeds and grains across the world, refining corn into crucial ingredients, developing high-tech nutrition components.
They are, as we said at the start, literally the hidden engine of the world's food supply. They're capable of navigating and even stabilizing global crises.
And on the other hand, you have the corporation that for a century has been repeatedly and systematically entangled in these significant ethical and legal controversies.
We've seen the pattern, from the early Sherman antitrust violation 100 years ago to the infamous, almost absurd lysine price-fixing scandal that landed executives in prison.
To the recent major SCPA violations, the politically fraught land deal, and now the current FBI criminal probe into their accounting practices. It's a long and consistent history.
So for you, the learner, understanding ADM means recognizing that this is a systemically important entity. They control the flow of raw commodities, they manage the logistics through their own transportation network, and they create the core ingredients for everything from animal feed to specialized food additives.
They are fundamental to modern life. There's no getting around that.
And understanding their role is vital because it means understanding the complex and often murky relationship between massive corporate power and government oversight. We saw that tension so clearly in the DOE-funded carbon capture projects.
Yes, millions in government funding, but they still failed to meet environmental targets and eventually resulted in a regulatory violation.
And we saw it in the Purdue land sale, where political access and corporate self-interest just seemed to intertwine to influence policy.
And this dynamic brings us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward. Given ADM's essential integration into the global supply chain and its documented history of repeated price manipulation, corruption, and environmental charges, we have to confront this uncomfortable paradox.
If a company is both indispensable to feeding the world and systemically vulnerable to corruption, what effective tools do societies have for regulation?
Can the world afford to let such an enormous engine fail? And yet, can we afford to let it continue operating as it has?
Yeah.
It's a tension between necessary scale and public trust that really defines the entire agribusiness sector.